Hello, everyone. How is everybody out there in unfound land? This is Unfound Live for June 16th of 2025. I have a fantastic, stupendous, remarkable show planned for you tonight. As you can see from the headlines, we're going to do a little UFO talk tonight. Going to talk about a podcast that I listened to, a true crime podcast about a disappearance that got solved. I listened to it while driving to where I am now. And I also want to talk about a disappearance that is still unsolved. And it's obvious to me that the investigation was bad from the very point that the disappearance happened. And this is a story that was sent to me to my email by a listener. And if you're ever wondering, it's not really mentioned in the episodes anymore, but if you ever want to email me anything, it's unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. So there you go. As you are watching tonight, I hope you will consider giving this video a thumbs up. Helps us with the YouTube algorithms. If you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, please hit the button right over there. And if you'd like to support what we do here at Unfound, there are a variety of ways to do that. You can go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. And it's right there at the bottom of the screen. You can PayPal at paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. During this live show, you can hit the super chat button under the chat. That's another way to support what we do. And then finally, if you're watching on YouTube tonight, you can't, of course, watch on Facebook as well. But if you're on YouTube, you can hit the join button below the screen where my face is, my head, me a talking head. And you can hit the join button and support the podcast that way too. So you're looking at this background and saying, something looks different. Something looks different. What is it? What is it? Well, I'll tell you what it is. Last Thursday, I drove from Clearwater Beach to see my dad. And I am at my dad's, and you're probably wondering, but still something seems different. Well, what has changed is at some point last year, between me being up here in August and December, my dad got me, quote unquote, me, a new bed. So the old bed was not that great, and it kind of ran this way along this wall. And he got me it is a much better bed. It's now a bed that runs this way. And so the space, and it's wider. It's like a double bed instead of like a single. It takes up a lot more room in this room where I usually, of course, I sleep here, and where I usually do the live shows. I've also do recording in this room for the podcast when I'm here. And so I can't usually sit. You're probably wondering usually you can see like the door to this room in the background. Well, now it's over there. You can't see it. So I just don't have the ability to sit that particular way. Everything's a little too jammed up on this side of the room. So I'm in the same room. I'm just, and the computer is on the same desk, but I'm like tilted to one side. And actually, it's actually pretty comfortable. I have the window right here. It faces west, and I'm seeing the sun go down. It's been pretty cloudy here today in Renfrew, Pennsylvania. But I could almost convince myself I'm back in Clearwater Beach, being that, of course, my place points west as well. But it's not quite dark here. I can see the sunlight and through the clouds, like just but there's too many clouds, but I can't actually see the sun. And I have this one window open. I keep it open at night so I can hear some birds singing out there. And in the morning, you wake up and there's all sorts of different birds, just there's a lot of wildlife around here. And so that's always pretty neat in the morning. And I have the fan going on here. It's quite comfortable in this room right now. This room can get very hot, but probably not till July or August. And that's one of the reasons I decided to come up here in June instead of, usually I come up to see my dad around my birthday, which is August 1st. Usually I get here maybe a few days before and stay a couple weeks. I decided, since I did not come up to see him in March like I usually do, I decided to come up a little earlier. So last Thursday, which was June 12th, left at about 6 in the morning. No, maybe 6:30, quarter to 7 in the morning. And I got here around 11 o'clock that night. Drove straight through one stop to get gas. The car ran great. It's become a pretty easy drive for me. I know 16 and a half hours, like a lot of people's like, dang, it's really no big deal. It's really not. So I'll be here, I'm guessing, to about the 26th. That'll be 2 weeks. I think that'll be plenty. And but I'm going to see my brother Michael, my brother Michael, who lives in the Pittsburgh area. He's going to be coming up here tomorrow. So we'll hang out, the three of us, maybe go to eat and do whatever else. And then I'm certainly going to be seeing my sister, Diane. We haven't worked out an actual day or anything yet, but that's surely going to happen. I hope to see my buddy Brad here. Hope to assistant Eric is also here in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania here right now. Hopefully we'll find some time to meet up for lunch or something. The issue is he's not, even though it's Western Pennsylvania, he's really not that close. I'm up here like 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh, and he's probably at least a half hour on the direct opposite side of Pittsburgh, like on the far side. So we'll see if we can work something out there. But it was time. And of course, my dad's thrilled to see my dad's doing great. Seriously, you'd never know that he was 88 years old. I say that with all honesty. Yes, he has a hard time hearing, and but other than that, he's as an able-bodied 88-year-old as you're ever going to find. To be, to be honest. So we've had a good time just hanging out. We took a long drive today. We got up and we made we do this every time I'm here. We go to all of the family plots, at least on his side of the family, the Densel side of the family, including my mother. So we went to the one cemetery where my mom is, where my dad's going to be, and where I guess I'm going to be. My headstones are there, and some of you who've been around, know that my dad has already set up a headstone for me. Every time I'm here, I take a picture of it. I post it on my private Facebook page. It's weird, but that's my dad. And then my grandparents, my dad's parents, are also buried in that cemetery, as are my dad's dad, my grandpa, my dad's dad is also buried in that cemetery. So a lot of Densels in that cemetery. And then we went to the other cemetery, which is that one's in a place called Shady Plain. And then the other cemetery that we went to was the one, Riverview Cemetery in Apollo, Pennsylvania. And that's where my dad's sister is buried with her husband, as are some other family members. So we did that. Then we went to eat. So we made this like huge, big circle around the kind of northeast of Pittsburgh. and it was a good day. And we do that every time I'm here. So that's what we did today. And then my dad this evening um, went to play cards with some friends. He does that every Monday evening at 7. But it sounds like he's home now. I think I just heard the door out there. So he's up there for a couple hours. And so yeah, I'm here in Pennsylvania, maybe for another week and a half, something like that. And I'll try to get some work done. I am getting work done while I'm here. But as I continue to say, when I'm here, I'm just not quite as efficient as usual. So let's see who is in the chat tonight. Hello, Milo. Amy. What's going on, Charlie? Hello, good evening, Uncle Ed. Say hi to Ed Sr. I'll say hi to my dad for me. Sure, Charlie. Hope to see your mother here sometime over the next week. Hello, Lisa. If you remember that question, Lisa, please remind. Hope you'll ask me that. D, what's up? Hello, Stephanie. Fishing, good to see you. D saying hi to everybody. Ed looks nice tonight. Thanks, Lisa. I didn't shave, but you can't tell because the lighting not as good as I can facilitate when I'm in my condo in Florida. But yeah, I didn't do that. Hello, Alicia from Tennessee. Good to see you. My son has that exact SA. Has that exact SA. What is SA, Lisa? My son has the exact same lamp that I see in the background. He bought it at a thrift store. This one back here. Yeah, that's I don't turn it on. I think it's just it works, but I don't turn it on when I'm in this room. But if you're looking back there, you can actually see the headboard of the bed in here. So you can see once again, little cramped in here, but not uncomfortable. Hello, neighborly. Mary, was your dad surprised when you showed up? I have to admit, I didn't totally surprise my dad. What happened, Mary Jane? Although I was planning to just show up here unannounced. I also know that when my dad likes to really prepare before I get here, and so I told him the night before. So after trivia last week, Wednesday night, I I take the trivia questions home, and then I do trivia with my dad, and I told him at that point that I had forgotten to tell him something, and he goes, "What'd you forget to tell me?" I said, "I'm driving up to see you tomorrow." So it wasn't as big a surprise as it could have been. Still a surprise, I guess. But Mary Jane, when I lived in Las Vegas, at least twice, I flew home and surprised my parents. They didn't know I was coming at all. And I arranged that with my brother Michael to pick me up at the airport and drive me up here. So I did that at least twice when I lived in Las Vegas, but I have never done that once I moved to Florida. But great question, Mary Jane. Thank you for asking. And Rockford, good seeing you. Rockford, Think Tank member. Rockford, I hope you're doing well out there on the West Coast. All right, Lisa has a question. My question, waiting for the verdict in the Karen Reed trial. All right, I have to answer this. Lisa did tell me before the show that she had a question, but it escaped her, and that she would be asking me if she thought of it tonight. So before I get into everything that I planned, for all of you tonight, I got to answer Lisa's question right there using the super chat button. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa's question is, my question, waiting for the verdict in the Karen Reed trial, do you have an opinion on how long the jury is out relates to guilty or innocent? Lisa, I think that can vary wildly. As I think all of you know, I of course have talked about Karen Reed the phenomenon of it, I'm not an expert on it. I've not watched one day of the trial or anything. I just have read some news accounts. And if I think that I need to talk about it during one of these live shows, I kind of cram, like we used to do in high school, cram for a test, kind of like that. But otherwise, I've not followed it. I don't think you can really gauge that. I really, Lisa, what I would say is you have to know the trial. I think that the only way you could really make an accurate prediction, for example, if you watch a trial that goes for 2 weeks and then you find out that the jury is going to be coming back in 3 hours, the only people who I think can really judge what the verdict is going to be by jury coming back that fast is if they watch the trial. My perception is that both guilty verdicts and non-guilty verdicts can happen very quickly. My perception is also the guilty verdicts and non-guilty verdicts can take a long time. So I don't think there's any automatic to it at all. I really don't. Um, all I would say is when it comes to longer trial, when it comes to juries being out for a long time and then actually delivering a verdict, in contrast to them being out for a long time and it's a hung jury. My perception when takes a long time, but they actually come to a decision, is that let's just say that maybe a couple jurors get peer pressured into changing their mind. So let's say that the split is like 10-2. And those 10 start to put a lot of peer pressure on those 2 to change their votes. And that takes time. Now, am I saying that's good for our justice system in the United States? Not really. I don't know what you can do about it. But if there's a lot of peer pressure and guilting and things like that going on in a jury room, I don't think that's good for the prosecution. I don't think because it can go either way. A bunch of people who think a defendant's guilty, pressuring a couple non-guilty voters, and the same thing, a bunch of non-guilty voters guilting a couple guilty voters. It splits both ways. So my perception, though, if it's long, that's usually what's going on. Whereas it doesn't take any sort of jury expert to know that when you get a quick verdict, that it's obvious, like right away, everybody's on the same page. But I don't know. I think I'm not a lawyer. I've only participated, I guess, technically in 2 trials, but really only one. When it comes to this, I don't think that my insight is any different than any other layperson's. Maybe as a prosecutor, or some defense attorney that goes to trial a lot. They probably, I'm sure they keep the statistics on such things. I have no idea what the stats are on such things. As far as Karen Reed does that mean that have they come back with? I've not been following it. Does that mean that the jury has come back, or is the trial over? Is it gone to the jury? Where are we in all of that? I've only in passing caught some headlines. That's it. Maybe somebody can tell me that. You're welcome, Lisa. I agree. It's hard to tell what the jury is thinking. Hello, Dee Dee. What's going on, Dee Dee? Hope you're doing well, Dee Dee. So what else is going on before I get into all this true crime stuff personally? Last Wednesday in trivia, we kind of righted the ship. We did not take a 0 last week. And it seems like not a lot of people got the final question correct. So we actually, although, it was only a few points, we cut down our distance between us and first place by a few points, and actually lengthened our lead on third place. We're in second place. So can't really complain about that. Now, of course, I'm not going to be there this week, and I'm not going to be there next week too. Well, this 2 days from now is the final week of the season, and then next Wednesday is the playoff, the one day playoff. So I won't be there for either of these. The team will have to do without me. I think they'll be fine. I just hope we get enough people to show up. So, there was a part of me that went, well, Ed, you should wait until this season done. You can miss the first couple weeks in the next season. And I was like, no, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go this way. I'm gonna miss those last couple weeks of this season, and that's just gonna have to be good enough. Lisa says jury got the case on Friday. Okay. Of course, they weren't there for the weekend. I would not say that this is a long holdout yet. I don't even know what would qualify. What would people consider for a jury to be out a long time? I don't know. So, even when it comes to the first Steve Pankey trial, it was a hung jury. I don't even remember how long that jury was out. I don't remember. I certainly knew at the time, but I don't know that now. So I think that's what's been going on. As far as Father's Day, which was yesterday, I took my dad where he wanted to go. He wanted to go to the Golden Corral. I'm sure most of you have been to that place. If you live in the United States, you've probably been to one at least once. The closest one to here is up in Sharon, PA. So we took a drive up there. We ate well. Had some guy, was it his wife, sitting in a nearby table that as I walked by, the guy said that I looked like a young Ozzy Osbourne. And I told the guy, well, that's better than looking like an old Ozzy Osbourne. He got a kick out of that. They got a kick out of that. And then we ended up talking about heavy metal music for a little bit. So that was kind of cool. And we ate well. I had some ribs. I had Brussels sprouts, which I love. Had some shrimp. Had some ice cream. And my dad, he ate pretty well too. So we enjoyed ourselves. It's a nice drive. It's a pretty easy drive. It's all highway going up there. But that's where he wanted to go for Father's Day. I said, fine by me. And yes, I paid too. So there's that. George, great to be here, Ed. Finally worked out how to watch and comment. Thank you for technical support, George. I apologize, but I want you to know, George, that that's very common. That new persons to Patreon and accessing the think tank and being able to watch and comment is it's not very straightforward. And so you are not the first person to have that problem the first time around, George. So don't feel like you're you made a huge mistake, or it's like something unique. It's not. A lot of other people have done the same thing. Who are people who are still now in the think tank. It all worked out in the end. But thank you for contacting me. I'm sorry I couldn't get back to you earlier. And Lisa says, I'd say 4 or 5 days would probably be a hung jury. Okay. So maybe by the end of the week, I guess Lisa's saying she thinks that, if they're not back by then, you got to think that this is going to be a hung jury. Okay. I can live with that. I don't know if I could live with a hung jury. I could continue to state with Karen Reed that I think she committed a crime, but murder and everything else, whatever the charges are, they seem to me to be a little extravagant. A crime, I think this is being over prosecuted. And that I think could really cost them, I think. So there you go. All right, so let's get to the true crime stuff for tonight's show. And once again, if you're watching tonight, please give this thumbs up there wherever you may be. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you're watching on Facebook and you're not yet a member, please go to the Unfound Podcast discussion group on Facebook and request to be let into the group. You just have to do a search for that. I'll start here with the true crime stuff, and that would be the Keith Schmidt poll. As I say every week, this is a poll. These polls are conducted every week. I post one, and I hope that people take part just to get an idea of what the audience is thinking about a disappearance. I try to pick a pretty good question. A lot of times I don't succeed. But this week's was that Keith Schmidt in the video. So we talked about how there was a nearby house or business or something, and they had a doorbell camera, and it caught a figure, just a shadow is the way it was described, that morning walking north, seemingly in the area of where Keith lived at the time. Of course, this disappearance is just over a year old. And I asked, was that Keith on the video or not? 77% of the people said no, that was not Keith in the video. So, 3 out of 4 people who answered the question, took the poll, said no, it is not Keith. So that means 25% of people said yes, it is Keith. So what do I think? At the blog that I write at patreon.com, that all you have to do is sign up and get in at the $2 a month level to access it. I decided that it was probably not Keith in the video. And I think maybe what was a little unclear in the interview, in the episode, that I did have asked by independent people who heard the episode. Just want to make this clear. I've never seen the video. All right. I don't even know if it is even public. In fact, I don't even think I asked that during the, because it's one of those things where I maybe should have. But if, the people who know Keith are up in the air about whether that is Keith or not, then it's not going to help me watching it. I've never seen him walk, or I don't even, I can't remember how tall he was, or did he have a limp, or I have no idea. So it really, in that particular situation, I don't know if it would help for any of us who didn't know Keith to see the video. It's, I guess, from a curiosity point of view, but from a real objective, constructive point of view, I don't know. So just want to make that clear, that I guess some people got the idea that I had seen it. I've not seen it. And I don't even know if it's public or not. So once again, Keith Schmidt poll in the discussion group on Facebook. 77% of people said no, it is not Keith. 23% said yes, it is. Now, arguments could be made either way, just from a historical point of view, that, on one hand, I guess, if we're to believe that Keith really sent that last text to Cody, it does seem like it kind of ends up that this figure on the video is seen not long after that text conversation ended. So that's something. On the other hand, being that it was May, we might have to be open to, was it some kid walking to school, some kid walking to a bus stop, some person just getting their morning walk in? A lot of different possibilities. All we know is, it seems like this video is known in the area, and nobody has ever come forward to say, yeah, that's probably me on the video. So it kind of cuts both ways. Lisa says, going back to Karen Reed, for sure, Karen Reed was over prosecuted. Okay. Just my perception. I'm not a law expert. I don't want to tell them how to do their jobs. I think that I've made my opinion known on the entire thing, that this whole case and everything else has been totally crazy on all sides. And our justice system is not any better for what is going on with Karen Reed and everything. It's just a fiasco. It's like a three-ring circus. And I really wish people would not, no offense to Lisa, who obviously has been following it. I know many of you have. I don't know how good really paying attention to things that become a fiasco like that is good for our justice system and good for our culture here in the United States. I think if it's just a very straightforward trial, you want to see what goes on, how things are really done in a courtroom, in contrast to the way Hollywood sells it, I think that's constructive. But when it comes to everything that is going on with Karen Reed and the cult-like status of her, and this true crime guy who got all this attention, then he got prosecuted or whatever his name is, and everything else, I have to admit, I just wish, just let them do their thing, and we'll do our thing out here of not paying attention to it and watching it every day. I don't know. But, it's no just different than O.J. Simpson. So, but like I said, I don't know if the justice system, even going back to the 1990s with O.J. Simpson, I don't know if our justice system got better and people came to respect our justice system in the United States anymore because of what went on there. And that's kind of how I feel about Karen Reed. But good question, Lisa, about juries. If you're wondering, that I've only been approached, I guess you got in a letter, about jury duty once in my life. That is it. And that was back in 2019. So I think it was before COVID. It was not long after I moved into the condo where I live now. And it ended up that I didn't have to do, it's one of those things where we're going to put you on the list and you have to call in at a certain time to find out. And I called in and they had come to some bargaining agreement or something. So I didn't even have to go to the courthouse, nothing at all. And that is the only time that, whereas, my buddy Dave, who I went to college with, who lives in Illinois, he's been on multiple juries. My buddy Brad, longtime best friend Brad from my Leechburg days, he's been on multiple juries. And I've only just gotten, a jury request letter once. And I didn't end up doing anything. I have to tell you, even though this is what I do, I have no interest at all being on a jury. Of course, I was involved in a trial twice, a big one. And, that I guess I had to do that. But as far as interest in sitting in there in a room with a bunch of other people and just count me out, man, count me out. I'm just not interested in that at all. I'm not going to say his name, Lisa. He just the host of that show got acquitted. Yeah, I'm bored. It's a wild ride. Yeah, Lisa. Thank you. All right. So that is the question, and then that is the Keith Schmidt poll. Gonna read. I want to go over one stat, and then I'm going to get into. Of course, I want to talk about UFOs tonight. We're going to talk about a disappearance that got solved. Now, I think I talked about this disappearance being solved before, but I'm going to talk about it again. And then I want to get to this bad investigation. So if you're looking at the headlines for tonight's live show, I'm going to cover all of them. Don't worry. But I do want to get to one interesting point. You know that this database these stats are all getting put together. And of course, Kathy, who I don't know if she's in here or not tonight, put together. And I am now entering those stats into a spreadsheet that is eventually going to get sent to a very good friend of mine in Pinellas County, who is going to be able to put this into something that will end up being a searchable database where we can start to, really do all these different kinds of searches and click off things like I've explained over and over and over. So I'm about 200 some disappearances into this. Of course, Unfound now is about almost 370. And one stat that I've already looked into that I thought you might find interesting is, what is the average amount of time for all of Unfound's disappearances that have been featured that a missing persons report was filed? What is the average time that it took for a missing persons report to be filed? Now, you have to understand some things before you start maybe guessing what that is. First of all, you have to understand that we have covered quite a few disappearances where a missing persons report wasn't filed for years. Those are not included. They skew the numbers way too much. Okay? To the point that it's not helpful. So any report that took longer than a year to happen is excluded. All right, please, because once again, when you start talking about some reports that are filed within a few hours, and then, let's say it's 12 hours, but then you have one that took 10 years. How many hours? A lot of hours. It really skews it. And just one case like that can throw off everything. So I thought that a year was a reasonable number. Certainly somebody else doing their own database could come up with a different criteria, but any disappearance where it took longer than a year for a report to be done, and there aren't many, but there are enough, are excluded. So what do you think the average report time is? Rockford says, I was going to suggest taking the median rather than the mean to eliminate the noise from. Eventually, I will be able to do that, Rockford. Can't do that with just in the spreadsheet that I have right now. I think eventually I will be able to do that. So this is just a raw, very average number. All of the, and I'm doing it in hours. I'm not doing it in days. So we're doing it in hours. How many hours did it take? So it's all the hours added up, divided by how many cases are in there. So what do you think that average number would be? I have to say, first impression, it's lower than I thought it would be. And now, you have to remember, there are some disappearances included in this average where, we have some disappearances that didn't get, this isn't, to be very clear, this isn't if some point that a person recognized that somebody was missing. This is actually when police got involved and started putting pen to paper. It's very, very clear on that. And just keep in mind, there are some that took, Eric Franks, for example, took 6-8 months from March until like November. Not a year, but still pretty long. It's included. Any Rockford guessed 96 hours. Anybody else want to take a guess? Anybody want to take a guess what the average is? This is like for the first 230 episodes that Unfound is featured, because we're going in order. Anybody want to take a guess? I see all of you. I see how many people we have in here tonight. Anybody want to take a guess like Rockford has? I'm going to wait. And this is, and I don't think something like this has been done before. Like I said, as I continue to say, NamUs is a good database, but we are really trying to get inside the numbers on this. Really trying to get inside. Like I said, I will give you once again another hint. It's not as long as I thought it would be. And I will tell you that in going through the database so far, I remember the disappearances and kind of the kind of person that went missing, and I remember some of the the big facts of the circumstances of the disappearance. But for the most part, how long it took a missing persons report to be filed is not something that sticks with me unless it's really weird, like I said, like Eric Franks. It really doesn't stick with me. And I will admit, I was kind of stunned on how many of these were report was filed within 24 hours. More than I would have predicted going back through all of them. And that is what I think kept the number down to a point that, because I thought those ones that like Eric Franks and some others took like 4 months, 6 months, 8 months would really pump that number up. Didn't do it as much as I thought. All right, so Rockford says 96. Lisa, all I can do is all I did is work with each databases. If you want help with stats, well, maybe we can talk about that, Lisa. That's interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. And Charlie says 7 days. All right, I've given maybe just a lot of people don't want to get involved. Don't want to be way off. Totally fine. The average time for a report to be filed for so far, now keep in mind I have like 130 disappearances to go, is 132 hours, which is 5.5 days. The average time it has taken a report to be filed, a missing persons report to be filed, 5.5 days. So kind of halfway between what Rockford guessed and what Charlie guessed, which is I find that interesting. But this is one of the ways that this database ultimately is going to be a lot different than others. I don't think that type of thing has ever been done before. Because obviously it takes some work. As Kathy put in that work, and I cannot thank her enough. And I'll be doing the rest of it by the way, because I need to have a hand on this to just understand how it was all really put together. But 5.5, like I said, it's not as high as I thought it was going to be. But 5.5 days is not good. And like I said, I know there were plenty where there was like 24 hours. But 5.5 days, we all know 5.5 days is forever in a disappearance. For any, maybe you might even say any type of crime, whether it's a missing person or a bank heist or anything else, that nobody realizes that a bank heist was done for 5.5 days. Well, that certainly gives the robbers an advantage. If somebody doesn't realize that their car was stolen for 5.5 days, that certainly gives the car thief a big advantage. And we can go on and on and on. Even when even with something like if your credit card number gets stolen, if you don't find out for 5.5 days that somebody's running up, charges on your card, that could be trouble. Now, granted, most banks are, you work it out and you'll get the money back, and the banks will try to figure out who's doing it and everything, but nobody really wants to go through that. So 5.5 days is a long time. And we might look at it as a reason that these disappearances have happened. If this is a true randomized sample of disappearances that Unfound is featured, and I believe it is, then the overall average for all disappearances in the United States, once again, leaving out those ones that where it's like really crazy over a year later or something. It's no wonder we have 100,000 people missing in the United States. If the average time it's taken for a report to be done is 5.5 days. So there you go on that. And there are other things that are I think are in the end going to be very, very interesting about this. So the continues to be done. I'm going to continue to state, I think this is going to be done by the end of the summer, but you just have to understand, I'll now be working on the database myself and to put it all together. And then when my good friend Cameron can get to it, as I've said, we've talked about it extensively so far, but he has a life, he has a real job, and everything else. So if it takes longer than that, that's totally fine too. It's totally fine. There's just some things that are within my control, some things out of my control. But certainly, he, finds this to be a very interesting project for him. But there's like 100 more things, at least in his life, that are more important than this. Of course, this is mainly important to me, but it's not like it is for everybody else. They have their own lives. But it's going to get done, and excited about that. So let's get to the first question, or the first topic, and that is UFOs exposed. That's the first one in the title tonight. There's an article that has come out in the Wall Street Journal. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read a section pertaining to it. And it has to do with all of this UFO stuff that has been going on in the United States for quite a while now, over 10 years, with, Navy pilots allegedly seeing UFOs and these people coming forward. Many of you know that guy is he still in Blink 182? I don't even know. He's a big UFO guy, and he's been coordinating with some guy who was in some government office, and it's this big deal about how the U.S. government, particularly the military, is covering up all of this. Well, when you start making allegations like that, making these big pronouncements, don't be surprised if people take these things seriously and try to figure out, well, what is actually going on? Well, the Wall Street Journal now has a story on it, and I'm just going to read a little bit about what was written. A Pentagon team tasked with investigating various conspiracy theories about a secret military program to study UFOs found that the real source of the rumors wasn't out of this world, but considerably closer to home. The U.S. military intentionally fabricated evidence of extraterrestrial encounters to provide cover for real secret weapons programs. The government targeted its own citizens with disinformation. A bombshell report in the Wall Street Journal highlights one example. An Air Force colonel gave photos of what seemed to be an alien craft to the owner of a bar near the infamous Area 51 in my former home state of Nevada. There was just one problem. The photos were doctored. As the journal relates, he confessed to Pentagon investigators in 2023. His actual intention: to hide the development of top secret, strategically essential otherworld seemingly, but in fact quite earthly aircraft being developed there in Nevada at that secret base. It's not really a secret base, but you know what I mean. Everybody knows it exists. It's just that nobody can go there. To keep these craft secret from the prying eyes of locals, it was better to make them think they came from Andromeda, as the Wall Street Journal put it. The Journal based its report on interviews with dozens of current and former U.S. government officials and on thousands of pages of documents. It found that military officers and intelligence officials routinely used extraterrestrials as a smokescreen for real secret weapons and occasionally as a joke. The Pentagon allegedly omitted key facts about this from a 2024 public report to Congress to avoid embarrassment. Government agents even used UFO lore as a tool to weed out leakers. When I've talked about this before, I think I've mentioned this. That they did this to find out who could and who could not be trusted. They used it to weed out leakers and obscure classified aviation developments. This information bears out the case made 2 years ago while criticizing media figures and politicians for embracing UFO claims. Now, most of the article is behind a paywall at the Wall Street Journal, but I found another, like I said, I found this, that kind of, the Cliff Notes of that article, and that is what it says. When will people learn? I came up with this idea, of course, I think most of you know when this topic has come up before on this live show, you know that I don't believe in UFOs. That is not to say that I necessarily believe the Earth is the only planet that has sentient beings. It's a big world out there, and I realize that there are certain belief systems that say that there's only life on Earth and there's no life anywhere else, and the Big Bang didn't happen. I'm not here to get into any of that. But here on Earth, although there are still a lot of mysteries regarding the Earth and the speed of light and everything else, I think we have proven as humans that we have a pretty good handle on physics. Not absolutely correct. There are still a lot of contradictions between quantum theory and the very, very big space physics and the very, very, very small quantum physics. There seem to still be some contradictions there, and everybody's looking for the unified field theory. But we have a pretty good handle on them. What do we know? That the rest of the universe, that as we know it, has all of the same physics that we have here. And we certainly understand that if aliens come here from somewhere else, they have to follow all of the rules that we do. And that makes space travel really, 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 really difficult to go anywhere fast. Maybe that'll change sometime. But right now, that seems to be the way it is. And as much as I am a Star Trek fan and everything else, and they talk about traveling faster than the speed of light, and seriously, if you really want to explore the universe, you need to do that because you can't get anywhere very fast. That is fantasy, and that is not reality right now. In addition, they're here, and they aren't coming from somewhere else. They're actually here, and we don't realize it. You might have been able to say that like in the 1500s or something. But here in the 21st century, where everybody has cameras and everything else. It's just a little hard to imagine. Or the way I've put it is that allegedly we as humans on the earth, we've taken possession, in Roswell, New Mexico, and Area 51, there's alien technology. What was that? Um, what was that one guy's name back in the 80s who said he worked at Area 51? Lazar was his name, Laza, Bob Lazar. Remember that guy? I think he was even on 60 Minutes and everything, and he's been proven to be a quack. But whatever, something occurred to me much more recently. It's like, if we really have all this technology and aliens have crashed ships here or whatever else, why didn't they come back to get that stuff? Knowing that we were not as an advanced a civilization as they are, did that not concern them that a bunch of humans that essentially in the Stone Age compared to them, would have this technology and, have their comrades, their own, the aliens that are inside these ships. Of course, I think a lot of people have seen that alien autopsy video that was done, that came out. They're just going to sit by while we operate on their buddies. Is that what we would do as humans? If we were out exploring the galaxy and a couple of our astronauts crashed on some planet, would we not try to get that technology back because we'd be worried about what could be done with it? I know this is something out of Star Trek, but I think this in the real world, I don't think it's any different than over history when advanced civilizations have come across primitive civilizations. Like, pick an explorer and coming upon the Incans and the Mayans or whatever. We know the dangers of putting new technology in the hands of people who have never seen that technology before. So would they not want to come get their fellow aliens and that stuff back? You'd think. But it seems they've never attempted to do so. That also has caused me to think, man, this is all crap. It's fascinating. I'm a huge X-Files fan. And I realized that if the world was really like the X-Files, if you were waking up every day and you were in an episode of the X-Files, I guess that might be kind of interesting, but it would be scary as hell too. But that's what makes it such great TV. And and as I stated, one of the things that first hit me when that first video came out, the little, what they talk about, the little white tic tac. They were out there in the Pacific and these naval aviators are flying around and they get this thing on their scope and it's this little white thing. And I'll keep bringing it up to everybody. These are people who were responsible for the safety of all of us in the military. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. That is their jobs. And whether it's some known enemy of the United States, like North Korea or whoever, or it's something that is unknown, they're supposed to be very, very serious about it. But how did those naval aviators in that video react? They were laughing at it. That tells me they knew what it was. And once again, this was just some kind of show. It did not worry them at all. It did not worry them that allegedly this thing was flying, way, way faster than anything man-made could and everything else. They were laughing at it. That told me something. Not real. But this is the problem when people, no matter what the topic is, when people want to believe something that doesn't exist. They believe in it too much. Like Stevie Wonder said, when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. You see superstition everywhere. That's what that song's about. And for all those people who absolutely want to believe that there's life on other planets and we're not the only ones, you open yourselves up to being fooled. Because there will be people who will take your belief system and just twist it all around, believing in things where there's no reason to believe them. So here we are. And the thing is, I realize there's going to be people that are out there, they're going to read this. Well, this is just a false flag operation. They're just saying this to make us not believe. It's amazing how the human brain can rationalize things. It's amazing. Now, granted, it seems other animals can do this too, dogs, cats, and higher intelligent vertebrae. Animals can do that too. But certainly humans are the best/worst at it. When confronted with things that show that they are wrong, they will rationalize it over and over, even when it comes to something like UFOs. So, there you go. That's the story. And I know some of you out there believe in UFOs and you want to believe and like the X-File, I want to believe and the truth is out there and believe the lie, all those like sayings they had over the course of the 10 years or whatever that the X-Files existed. And I love the movie like Signs. Of course, that was M. Night Shyamalan, however you say his name. Of course, Mel Gibson, Joaquin Phoenix was in that movie. That was like 20 years ago. And I thought that was a pretty good movie about aliens coming to Earth and Independence Day. I like it from a standpoint of entertainment. But from a standpoint of what's really going on here in the real world, it's not happening. It's not happening. What's everybody saying? Lisa says, I love it when Ed talks science. I guess I did okay in science. Keep me away from biology and things like that. But physics and things, I love that type of stuff. Did not do very well. And I did well in physics in high school, not in college. But I read A Brief History of Time way back when that was a bestseller back, what was it, in the 80s? I read that book. In fact, I probably have it somewhere in one of my boxes in my condo in Florida. I take an interest, in that stuff. But in reading that stuff, then you start to realize how improbable these kinds of things are. And then you add in a little bit of, well, what would humans do if they were in an alien situation? And you see the whole idea starts to fall apart pretty quickly. Pretty quickly. And as far as Roswell, New Mexico goes, I will continue to insist that, of course, it was some weather balloon or something. I can't even rule out that it was just somebody's idea of marketing the town. You know what? Our little town here, it's really out of the way and nobody comes here. How do we generate some business in the town? I got it. We're going to claim that a UFO landed here. 1940s. Of course, we just got through World War II. People were afraid. Of course, now that everybody knew that the nuclear bomb existed and was used. And with, now the Soviet Union existing and all of that, easy to scare people. It's like, well, UFOs. And suddenly Roswell, New Mexico, that surely otherwise you never would have heard of it, is suddenly on the map out in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. And even to this day, people go there just to check it out. Do you know how many millions, if not billions, of dollars that story back in the 1940s has brought to that town? You got to think about it that way. Whoever thought, I'm pretty sure, whoever thought of that marketing campaign, brilliant. Brilliant. And thank you, Lisa. Gifted one the Fozcast channel membership. Thank you so much, Lisa. You're getting it done tonight, and D likes that a lot as well. All right, let's move on to this. I'm gonna, being that now it's night here, and I got this window open. There's no screen. I got to shut this window because there's no screen on it. It's starting to attract a few bugs. Hold on, just a moment. I will open that back up once I go to bed tonight and turn off all the lights, and so that then the bugs won't be attracted. But as you know, at night you leave lights on, you got an open window, like bugs, moths start flying in here. So had to close that. George, hello, George. Agree. Always skip the Unsolved Mysteries episodes with UFO stories and no time for it, George. Okay. Yeah, Unsolved Mysteries. George, that's a really, really, you bring up a very interesting point. I wonder how many people did do that. And, even though I watched Unsolved Mysteries, I know some people really, really, really went crazy for that show back in the day. Certainly I watched it, but I given my age, my first, encounter with stuff like that was the show In Search Of, which was even way zanier than Unsolved Mysteries. But it does bring up a good question: is did people do that? Unsolved Mysteries was a show where they'd be covering some real crime, unsolved murder, and then after the next break, after the commercial break, they come back with some UFO story. You think about it, it is a little weird programming, I guess. So thank you for bringing that to my mind, George. It was just like right in front of our faces. I guess just everybody just accepted it. All right, moving on very quickly. This is not on the list tonight, but what did I tell you last week? Last week, I talked about this bomb threat on this plane that happened at the St. Pete Airport, not the Tampa Airport, but the St. Pete Airport from back in April. And, how would they go about trying to track down who did this? And what did I say? You can go back and check it. I stated usually when we have bomb threats at airports, it has to do with somebody who is going to be late for a flight, calls in a bomb threat so that plane doesn't take off. You can go check it. A week ago, I talked about that. Well, guess what happened in the past week? There was a Spirit Airlines jet that was supposed to take off from Detroit. Some guy who was supposed to be on that plane was going to be late. He called in a bomb threat. Now he ended up getting caught. That happened just this past week. That, when it comes to aviation stuff like that, even though I've never aspired to be a pilot and I don't even like flying, for some reason, I have a good understanding of all this stuff. And I told you, usually it's that. And we have had something happen right after I talked about it last week. It happened in Detroit. Man called in a bomb threat because he was late for the plane. And that guy is going to be in big, big, big trouble. That's, if you're like a 13-year-old and you're in junior high school and you didn't study for a test and you call in a bomb threat to the school so school can't happen that day, if you got caught, there's going to be issues. You're going to, it's not going to be pretty. But that is a world away from calling in a bomb threat on a plane. Because of everything that has to be shut down and the airport gets stopped, and no plane's allowed to take off, on and on and on and on and on. In addition, that's a big time federal crime, big time problems. Don't do that. Don't do that. All right. Instead, how about you leave your house a little earlier and get to the airport on time? There's a thought. But that happened this past week after I just talked about it on Monday. All right. I want to talk about the disappearance to discovery. In fact, I'm even going to make a prediction that Karen Shepard's disappearance to discovery will be the next Found episode for all you Patreon and YouTube supporters. I'm going to make that prediction right now. But her disappearance got solved this past year. And I need to type something in here just to make sure I get all this right. And this is a disappearance that happened in 1983. She went missing from Carpentersville, Illinois, but it was investigated by the Elgin Police Department. And she was eventually found in her car in a river, deceased. But it took over 40 years. Well, there is a podcast out now. It is called Somebody's Knows Something. I know many of you know the podcast that's been around for a long time called Someone Knows Something. But this is a podcast that was hosted by the two investigators who were working on Karen's disappearance. And that is what I ended up listening to driving. One of the things I listened to driving here to Pennsylvania last Thursday. And it's very much like Tara Grinstead, of course, with Up and Vanished with Payne Lindsay, how he did the, everything regarding Tara's disappearance. And then, of course, he wasn't working on it. Of course, he had police officers, investigators, other people on his podcast. Of course, we're going way back to like 2016 now or whenever it was. But we know that Tara Grinstead, although she was never found, a couple guys were prosecuted and convicted of murdering her. Kind of the same thing where he started out and it wasn't solved yet. And then Tara Grinstead's disappearance did get solved. How much of a role Up and Vanished played in that is debatable. But this is kind of the same thing, but these were the actual investigators. So they decided they got permission from their captain, their superior, that they wanted to do this podcast. They're working on it. What did the superior think about it? She said, yeah, go ahead, do it. And so the podcast actually starts out where Karen hasn't been found yet. This is not a situation where they found Karen and then decided to do a podcast on it. They started the podcast before. We eventually find out that during the making of this podcast, and I think it's like 11, 12, 13 episodes, something like that, and they're all under an hour long, that you eventually found out, not to ruin it for everybody, but during the making of this podcast, they found Karen. So it's fantastic. And I'm not here to undermine that. And I'm not here to undermine that. I'm really, really not. I keep saying, I realize that a lot of people are out there making mistakes and disappearances are getting solved. They're getting solved. And in fact, with her car being in a river, Chaos Divers were involved. But this is actually kind of my point. Just I have in my notes. Found last year, car found in a river along the route that she would have been traveling back then in 1983. She had been at a bar, decent reason to believe she had been drinking. And I have nothing against it. This is one of these, I have to do all these like disclaimers before I say it, because what I'm going to say is going to sound really rude. But it's not, it's professional. It's not personal, but I have to do these disclaimers beforehand. Obviously, the two guys involved in this, obviously good people. Obviously. They seem to be good guys. I'm thinking that we need more police officers like them. Um, and I thought they did the podcast in a pretty good way, given that I don't think either of them have any public speaking experience or recording experience or anything else. And I think they did have some help on that end with that part. It's not like me where I'm doing the interviews and editing the interviews and I don't think they're doing it that way, but still. But still, I think it's a high quality podcast. Now, having said all of that, within the first episode, you can hear what is so wrong about the investigations of disappearances in the very first episode. Because here's what probably most of you know this by now. After if you've listened to this podcast, Unfound, for at least a few years, what is one of the things that you'd never want to bet a ton of money on it, but maybe $100. But in disappearances where people and their cars both go missing together and are still missing, what have I said? The longer a disappearance lasts like that, the more likely it's going to be that the missing person and the car will be found together. And most likely it will be in a body of water, and that it will not be foul play. I've said that quite a few times over the past, maybe not 9 years, because this is, once again, I was a newbie like everybody else in 2016, but probably around 2020, like around COVID times or something like that, is probably when I have started putting that idea out there. I knew in the first episode that these two guys made the same mistakes that every other investigator makes. Jane, thank you for becoming a supporter here on YouTube. Thank you so much. Good to see you tonight, Jane. I hope you're doing well. Thank you. Now, why did I know this right away on episode number 1? Because they said, we're going to take a look at 6 different possibilities for Karen's disappearance. 6. When really not 100%, but pretty close to 100%, there's only one. And the reason that this podcast went 11 or 12 episodes, my perception, as far as listening to it and, going with the timeline that they were giving of everything. Remember, they started the podcast before Karen was found. They found her during the making of the podcast, which came out last year. They didn't even make Karen going into a body of water in her car their first choice. Instead, they looked at the possibility that, that was she spotted with somebody? Could there have been a gang? Could there have been a gang influence? Could there have been somebody stalking Karen and all of these other things? Now, if you're asking me, is that physically possible? Yes. Of course it's physically. Women are getting stalked all the time. How many women do you know who have been stalked? They go missing and their cars go missing too. I think after 360 some disappearances, we know the odds of that happening are next to 0. It's never going to be 0. Very, 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 very close to 0. But they looked at some, not all 6. Let's say the way, my perception of way they were doing their investigation, Karen going into a body of water with her car, I think was what was like number 4. It wasn't 6, but it wasn't first, it wasn't second, it wasn't third. They went and talked to all these different people who knew her, talked to her coworkers, talked to her friends, everything else. Meanwhile, I'm listening to it, driving up here, not knowing exactly where it was going, even though I knew that Karen Shepard's had been found because it was in the news. And like I said, I'm guessing I talked about it when it happened, I think, on this live show. Maybe I didn't, but it was certainly on my mind. The name is very familiar to me. The whole time I'm thinking, guys, you can skip all of this. Just go to looking in bodies of water around there. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. You do not know how many times me sitting in my car driving from Florida into Georgia, into South Carolina, into what's the next? North Carolina. When I was listening to it, was I saying, guys, you don't have to do all of this. You're putting too much work into this. Too much work. You do not. She's in a body of water with her car. I don't know where. I don't know why. But she is in a body of water along that route. I don't know. I've never been to this area. I've never been on any of these streets. But you start telling me that the road goes by next to a river or something, that's probably a good place to look. And guess what happened? That's what they eventually did. And that's where she was eventually found. My point is not that I'm some sort of Singali. I'm not Karnak like Johnny Carson used to do back in the day and being able to predict the future. I'm not like that. What I'm proving is this stuff can be studied and learned to the point that you can make very, very, very accurate predictions about what the resolution will be. And that is what you should investigate first. So what ended up happening was they finally got to, okay, I guess we're going to investigate the bodies of water now. They got chaos divers involved. Chaos divers went out there, and I forget how long they were out there. Not long. They did find quite a few cars, and they eventually came in that were out there for whatever reason, and they eventually found Karen's with her in it. And it does seem that the parking brake was engaged. So we're never going to know for sure what was going on. But it does seem to me that this was not a drinking and driving issue. Given that her parking brake on her car was, it had one of the handle ones, and I think in the middle. Like a lot of sportier cars have that. And it was a Toyota Celica. Probably what happened, it was like some deer or a dog or something jumped down in front of her. She swerved. She hit the brakes. The car wasn't stopping fast enough. She pulls the parking brake, and still she goes into the water. That's most likely what happened. Now, could anybody have predicted that? No. But you certainly could predict that she'd be in a body of water along the route that she would have been driving that night. But what they also exposed in doing this podcast, it was clear to them, even though the paperwork originally back in 1983 said that bodies of water were searched, they came to the conclusion that none were searched. They thought that, I don't think that was done. So there was even falsifications in the paperwork from the investigation in 1983. I urge you to, so when you say a disappearance solved, that's what I'm talking about tonight. It got solved. It didn't need to last 40 some years. This is a disappearance. If somebody had been doing disappearance analysis back in 1983, this disappearance would have been solved in days. And even now, 40 years later, with computers and everything else, the investigators who are working on it today still did not make that their first choice as to what they should do regarding her disappearance. It really bothers me. Everybody, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't. The only reason I think too many people, obviously many in law enforcement, is because they believe that this stuff can't be predicted. It can't be studied. You can't draw any conclusions from it. You can. How do you account for the fact that I can predict like 90 some with 90% accuracy disappearances that get solved? How is that possible? I don't consider to myself to I do have a decently high IQ, but I'm not in Mensa. Driving me nuts. Like I said, this is not personal against these guys. But what it also shows me, and this is I can tell you right now, this is going to be a new statement that I'm going to start making, is that it's very obvious to me the people who have all the information to solve these disappearances are not the ones best equipped to solve these disappearances. They have all the information, but they don't know what to do with it. Even some smart guys like these two guys obviously are. When they start looking at paperwork and saying, well, we really figured that there were like 6 different possibilities. No, there's one. There's only one worth considering. It could be that you could be right, that those others, but percentage wise, if you're going to Vegas, her going into a body of water in her car and her being in her car is overwhelmingly the most likely outcome. So why do you start investigating all the less likely stuff? Why are you doing that? It's hard to understand. Rockford, I know that area well. I used to work very close to Carpentersville. The case rings a bell, but I haven't researched it. Coming from a bar and car is missing too. You can guess my initial reaction. Yeah, cool. Yeah. I don't know why police are making all of this stuff so damn difficult. I don't know why. It doesn't have to be like this. It does, and you know, it's one of those things. I listened to all of the episodes. I think were there 8, 9, 10? There were quite a few. The disappearance. If they were going to do a disappearance or a podcast on her disappearance, and if they'd gone right to Searching Waters first, the podcast series would have only been 3 episodes. They didn't need to do as many as they did. And they didn't need to do all of the driving around and tracking people down who knew Karen and ask her what she was doing that night and all these witnesses and everything else. They didn't need to do any of it. It's so inefficient. Now, if it were a different kind of disappearance, if it were a disappearance like Amanda Fravel or a disappearance like Jody Husentrut, or you know, even with some guys too, then yes, you're going to have to go do all those things. But when people go missing with their cars and they're both still missing all of these years later, not 100%, because we do have like a disappearance like Lola Catherine Fry, where it very well could be that she did not drive off in her car. Instead, somebody put her in her car and took that car somewhere or something, which would make it a lot more difficult. But I still believe that Lola Catherine Fry is with her car. I just don't know where. And it's not easy to figure out like it could be with Karen Sheppers or with Esther Westenbarger or with Donald Irwin. You know, Lola's is certainly different, but I still insist Lola and her car are together somewhere. But with 90 some percent accuracy, you know what this kind of disappearance is, and that can really help. In contrast to thinking, well, yeah, 6 different possibilities. Now, granted, are there disappearances that Unfound is featured where there is more than one possibility? Absolutely. I don't know if any of them have 6 though. When you start really looking at the statistics and probabilities of all of this, you know, maybe 3. Even with, like, as I will continue to say, Jason Jolkowski's disappearance, certainly one of the hardest to analyze. Even with his, at most, it's 3 possibilities. He walked off, and he couldn't have started a new life, because of his mental capacity and everything. He walked off to commit suicide somewhere, and somebody just hasn't found him. There was some sort of accident that happened, and somebody covered it up, or somebody just outright abducted him for purposes of harming him. That's it. 3. That's it. Not 6. 3. Now, how much money would I put on that? That it'll once, and of course, I still believe it can be solved. I put $1,000 on that. If I'm wrong, I can lose $1,000 missing that. Oh, I'll be fine. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be one of those 3. Now, why do I know that? Because this is the work that I do. It's obvious these police get it wrong because this isn't the work they do. Imbo and Patron fit same profile, right? And I realize, well, Ed, all those bodies of water have been searched. That's true. But it's like Audrey Herron. It's like Audrey Herron. The big, when you get to people in their cars and they go missing together, I will admit that when you start searching the routes that they should have been taken, and nothing comes up, it gets difficult really, 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 really fast. That still does not change the idea that they're with their cars and that it's not foul play. And you don't have to be going, interviewing, hitmen and whoever else. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. Making people disappear with their cars on purpose is very difficult and very high risk. And it's the reason that so many missing people who do meet with foul play, their cars are left behind. That's the reason, like a Dale Kerstetter. There's a reason that his vehicle was left behind. And Jody Huisentruit, there's a reason her car was left behind, that she was just taken and not her car too. Why? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And I remind everybody, people who do this stuff, they want to get away with it. Jackie says, sounds like you should be teaching class detective parties of training. Jacqueline, if only. Trying. But, the problem we have, Jacqueline, is that the human ego plays a huge role in all of this. And as a friend of the podcast, Julie Colley, who hosts the Consult podcast, stated, and when I interviewed her, she did correct me on it. But as an FBI agent for over 20 years, she had an occasion to have a conversation with an investigator in a local police department, and that investigator said, "We don't like to call you in because we're so afraid that you're going to find a mistake that we made." Now, does that sound like somebody who is really, really interested in solving a crime? Any kind of crime. Maybe there wasn't even a crime. We have to remember with Karen Shepard, there was no crime committed. It was an incident. But still, they'd rather nobody look at it. They'd rather no fresh eyes look at it and just have it sit there, is essentially what they're saying. That is human ego talking, and that is something that is really, really hard to get through. Really hard. Rockford, don't sleep on the bar element, though. One can search all logical bodies of water, but get a few drinks in the equation, and the destinations routes can get creative. It's true. In fact, you might be even open to that idea with Esther Westenbarger. Why was she on this road when she should have been on that road? We'll never know. Could have been drinking and driving, but maybe she was just going out for a spin and didn't know what road she was on. And remember, she was new to that area, Kokomo, Indiana. She just moved there. And I will say that that intersection is not very well designed. I mean, who puts a body of water, at that side of a T intersection? You're asking for trouble, and trouble happened. So you're right. You're right, Rockford. Who knows where they can go? But like I said, with Audrey Herron, with Daniel Imbo, and forget his name, Patron Imbo. Yeah, if it's not in the logical, but you at least got to search them. And it's clear with Karen Shepard, they didn't even do that. They lied about it back then, and then even in the present, they didn't do that until they did all of these other things. I'm like, what's going on here? Frustrating. Jane, Chaos Divers is still working with Mark Milligan to find his brother Harry and his car that has not been seen since 1984. I knew somebody was working on that, Jane. Tough. But, the thing is, Jane, at least they're doing the right thing. At least. So, just going to keep saying it. These people are in their cars somewhere. And when there's no reason to believe that they took off and left their lives, Audrey Herron, took off. Well, I don't want to be a mother anymore. I don't want to be married anymore. I don't want to work. I'm going to go to California. It's just not probable. It's just not. It's conceivable. I mean, people can do that, but it's just not very possible, and it's certainly not probable. And then we start talking about carjackings. How many carjackings do we know that we end up finding out that they're carjackings, but they're attached to a disappearance? Very, 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 very few. Way more people are driving into bodies of water by mistake from drinking and driving or whatever than people getting carjacked. Their cars are going missing and then they disappear. Really, when we start talking about car theft in the United States, it's parked cars with nobody in the car. Carjackings happen. But usually with carjackings, the car is the target. The person is not. Now, people get shot, people get hurt and everything, but the car is the target, not the person. They're after the car, not the person. So no reason to make the person disappear. You might kill them, and the person might be lying there in a parking lot. But Rennie says, I'm a little late to the party, so apologies. You already covered this, but have there been any updates of the vehicles recently found in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas? Not since I talked about it last week, Rennie. No. I'm guessing that's going to take some time, and that's going to be probably a lot of work that is done behind the scenes. I'm going to echo what I said last week. I would be shocked if more than one of those cars has anything to do with a missing persons case. In fact, I would be shocked if even one does. This looks to me like a dumping ground for criminals stealing cars and then committing crimes with those cars and then dumping them there. In contrast to there being some serial killer around the Dallas area, abducting people, making them disappear and their cars disappear. If that was really going on in the Dallas area, there would be a huge task force and everything else regarding that's like a serial killer on the loose, making people disappear, making their cars disappear. But that's not what is happening. So I don't know. There's no update. And Rennie, I would not expect an update anytime soon. I would not. Oh, speaking of cars in Dallas, the Alan White case is something I haven't checked in some time. Now, that was probably a carjacking. Rockford, I don't think it was. They had video of him at a convenience store, getting in this car by himself and taking off. It's a tough one, Rockford, and I've not forgotten about that. And I occasionally do check in on that. And there are no developments. Zero. Even though his car was eventually found. He was eventually found near that school and he was dead. But the problem, of course, is they never released the cause of death. Did he shoot himself? Did he overdose? Was he murdered? That might help. Of course, what do the stats say? The stats say this was a suicide. But it's not overwhelming. It's certainly not with people going missing in their cars. It's not like that. But the stats say this was some sort of guy going through something and didn't want to go home for some reason, and something wasn't working out in his life, and he went and did this. Maybe he completely lost his mind. Maybe he had a panic attack and killed himself. Maybe, I don't know. But second would be that he was going to meet somebody and got lured there and got murdered. I think that's probably what the stats say. But like I said, this is not a disappearance. This is not a disappearance that I know. We don't know the nooks and crannies of the disappearance like we do the ones that are featured on the podcast, and me answering, asking like 1,000 questions. And unfortunately, being that Alan was found, he's not in the demographic anymore for what we do here. I'm not saying I don't wish he hadn't been found. I mean, that might have been interesting, and maybe I would have gotten into it by this time. But that's one. That's a head scratcher. Such a typical morning for a professional with family in town, picking up some bagels, and then, yeah. Well, the way I remember that, Rockford, there was something about him having some sort of dating app on his phone, even though he was gay. He was in a committed relationship with someone. As I remember it, he did have some sort of dating app or something on his phone. This would kind of like if a married guy or a heterosexual married guy had Tinder on his phone. For some reason, that's sticking in my mind, which, so that could bring in the luring aspect of his disappearance and death. But I think at this point, I'm still thinking this was a disappearance caused by he himself alone. But thank you for reminding me that. So that is Karen Sheppers. And not to put too fine of a point on it, but the name of their podcast is Somebody Knows Something. And it's Avi and Karen Sheppers' place. Nobody knew anything except Karen. Nobody knew it. Anybody that they could have talked to after Karen went missing would not have been helpful. Nobody knew anything. Nobody saw her going in the water. Nobody was out on the river in a boat that night and saw something. Nobody knew anything. So even the title of the podcast is not even accurate of what went on with her in the actual investigation of her disappearance. Nobody knew anything. So there's that. All right. Still got to get to a bad investigation. And though I'm not even talking about this, I want to talk about Aaron Pospasil. This is a disappearance that is still unsolved. But I got an email from a longtime listener, and he likes to send me things that catch his eye in the news. And so I'm going to read this article, and you're going to see what I mean by bad investigation. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Families waiting for answers in Iowa cold cases are finding hope after DNA technology led to an arrest in an 1983 Lynn County murder. Aaron Pospasil went missing in Cedar Rapids in 2001. TV9 talked to her stepmother, Carolyn Pospasil, who believes DNA could help her case. So they're talking about something else. They're not talking about Aaron's case. Last time Pospasil saw her daughter, she was 15 years old. I still have hope that at some point she's going to walk through that door or that we're going to find her somewhere. What comes in with that is you question after 20 years, is that rational? Is that something I should think? Investigators say on June 3rd, 2001, Aaron left a friend's house on 2nd Avenue Southeast in Cedar Rapids. And I want you to pay very close attention to this, even though I'm reading it very fast, because I want to make sure we get done on time. Investigators say on June 3rd, 2001, Aaron left a friend's house on 2nd Avenue Southeast in Cedar Rapids and got into a black 90s Chevy Cavalier. She was never seen again, and a body has never been found. Her stepmother said Aaron's DNA was not collected because authorities considered her a runaway. Now, I hope you're listening to this very quickly. This is a huge mistake, and I'll get to it shortly. We didn't know to save her hairbrush, to save her toothbrush. So when I was cleaning the bathroom one time, things just got thrown out. You know, why do you save a toothbrush? But she said there's still a chance DNA could help find her daughter. They collect DNA from her dad and mom, so the DNA is in the database in Fort Worth, NamUs. So it's there if she's ever found. Just last month, Lynn County investigators used DNA to make an arrest in a 1983 murder. So Aaron goes missing in 2001. She has nothing to do with this 1983 murder. All right, did you hear that? I'm going to read it one more time. Even now, so this article was just written recently about Aaron's disappearance. And I'm going to read you again what the circumstances are. Pay close attention. Investigators say, so in the present, 2025, in the year 2025, investigators say on June 3rd, 2001, Aaron left a friend's house on 2nd Avenue Southeast in Cedar Rapids and got into a black 1990s model Chevy Cavalier. She was never seen again, and a body has never been found. All right, so that was the article that was sent to me by this listener. And I read it. I was like, wow. You know, at first glance, what are all of you thinking? Well, it sounds like, she's at a friend's house. I'm guessing that friend can be believed. And yes, she really did get into this black 1990s model Chevy Cavalier. It happens. You know, we might have had a couple disappearances like that in Unfound's catalog that are like that. So, reading that, I was like, well, okay, well, what does the Charlie Project say about Aaron's disappearance? So I went to Megan's site, went to Aaron's page, and here's what it said. Now, once again, pay very close attention. Aaron was last seen on June 3rd, 2001 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So they got that right. She asked her parents if she could spend the night with a friend, Britt McCune, a girl. She had gone to McCune's house earlier that day, and then at 8:45 p.m., she went to accompany her to the movie theater, but allegedly Britt wasn't there at the time. They had known each other. Aaron had known Britt for about a year. McCune later said she didn't know Aaron was caught, but later, when Britt was questioned about Aaron's disappearance, she said, I didn't even know Aaron was coming over that night. So what was written in the original or the article recently is not true. She did not get to a friend's house. She went over there and Britt wasn't even there. I will read on. This is where it gets interesting. Aaron's parents had agreed to let her go to McCune's house, and a neighbor, Curtis Paget, gave her a ride to the residence in the 1500 block of 2nd Avenue Southeast. A photo of Paget is posted with this case summary. I'm going to try not to laugh, but Erin took a blanket with her in Curtis's car because she said Paget's car seats were dirty and torn. Well, how would she have known that unless she had been in Curtis's car before? It's Curtis. The story about her leaving in a Cavalier. This story comes from Curtis. He states that when they arrived, McCune wasn't home, but a dark-colored two-door early 1990s model Chevy Impala or Cavalier with dark-tinted rear windows pulled up to the curb of the house. It was driving the wrong way on the one-way street. Erin spoke to the occupants for a short time, then got into the back seat of the car, saying she would get a ride with them. She took the blanket along with her. She was never seen again. So this story that we have about Erin getting into a 1990s Cavalier comes from this neighbor, Curtis Paget, who was 21 at the time, who drove her there. And keep in mind, when questioned later, Britt didn't even know that Erin was coming over to her house. So what was really going on here? Now, would it shock you to know that Curtis Paget ended up being a murderer? Would that shock you? Just a few years after that, he killed some old guy, and he was finally convicted through DNA like 15 years later. Would it shock you to know that Curtis Paget ended up being a murderer? And so I have in my notes. So imagine if you're an investigator at the time in 2001. You know that Erin got into a car with a 21-year-old. And she took a blanket because she said his car is always dirty. Well, how would she know that? How was it even arranged? And you found out that where Erin said she was going, that girl wasn't even there. And on top of that, you find out that the only person who can verify that story is who came up with the story is the guy who drove her there. So she goes there looking to meet Britt, but instead she's not there, but some other car just happens to be waiting there. This is Curtis's story. Is it not obvious to everybody that Erin and Curtis had something going on? And that this story about the Cavalier should have never been entered into the record? Is this not obvious to everybody? And that the reason she brought the blanket is because she and Curtis were going to go do some things somewhere. And guess what? He probably raped her and killed her. Is this not obvious to everybody? Yet still, it seems for all these years, investigators have chosen to believe Curtis' story, even though at the time in 2001, everybody should have rejected it. And the only person who should have gotten any attention, even before they knew that he was going to murder somebody years later, the only person who should have been a suspect in this is Curtis. Crazy. I know I just gave those two investigators for Karen Shepard's a hard time. What they did is way better than what these investigators here did. And not recognizing, I think that story's crap. I don't think there is a Cavalier. I think that Erin came up with a story so she could spend time with this Curtis guy. And they went somewhere, he killed her, he dumped her, and then he came up with the Cavalier story. It hurts. It hurts me so much. It hurts. I don't know. It's hard for me to get a handle on whether her family, the way the article was written that was sent to me, it seems that the family still, they have to know now that Curtis Paget ended up being a murderer. But there is nothing in that article that was written recently to cast any doubts that the official story that's been around all these years is wrong. As a reporter myself, that drives me nuts. If you didn't go and check the Charlie Project, you would actually just think, well, yeah, she got to this friend's house and the friend saw her leave in some car. That's not what happened. Well, the thing is, Rockford, is that her family verified that she did take a blanket. I mean, that's where the story came from. So I mean, we can quibble about that, but in the end, it's still the same. It's still the same thing. Curtis almost surely, and of course it helps, we now know that he's a murderer now. Although it wasn't a girl, it was some old guy. He surely killed her. And they surely had something going on. And they surely, the Brit story was the cover story. You know, like I don't even have teenagers, and I know this. What do teenagers do? Jane Doe says she's going over Sally Brown's house. Sally Brown says she's going over to Jane Doe's house when really they're getting together and going somewhere else. And my guess is that Aaron came up with the story without letting Brit know. She goes, oh yeah, I'm going to Brit's, when really she was going with Curtis somewhere. That's what kids do. I might even done that once when I was a kid. Maybe. I don't even buy I think the blanket belongs to Curtis and he needs a story if she's found wrapped in a blanket. Okay. Okay, fair. No quibbling here. Okay. I mean, what does nobody have any of that spidey sense, that Columbo, I know it's fiction, that Columbo type of instinct anymore? Does nobody have that anymore? You know, is this what DNA has done to our investigators, modern investigators? That without science, they have no instincts for a crime at all. That they, you know, there's nothing that says, you know what, that story that the driver who took Aaron, man, that story, something sounds wrong about it. And that Britt didn't know she was coming over, and you know, she has a blanket. This sounds like a guy and girl that were going parking somewhere. But still, in 2025, they're still writing it like actually Curtis intended on, really did drive her over there. It's crazy. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're about the end. I wanted to maybe talk about Area India Flight 171. Not going to get to that. And I had one other story that I wanted to get to, but not going to get to that either. Maybe next week. But this Friday, the interview's already been done. We are going to the fine state of Minnesota, to Fridley, Fridley, for the July 18th, 2022 disappearance of Matthew Tuttle, Tuttle. I interviewed two of his sisters and his mother all at the same time. I did that this past Friday, and that will be the episode for this Friday. In some ways, it's like Keith Schmidt's. But for Matthew, he went missing on the very same day that he got out of jail. He was in jail. He was in a car where a guy's friend had been drinking and driving, and they did something, and they got away, and the other person was caught too, but Matthew was not driving. Matthew was in jail for about 5 days before he was let out under bail or something, and a friend picked him up. Friend dropped him off back at Matthew, where Matthew was living by himself. And there is a witness that says as soon as his friend dropped him off and drove away, Matthew came out of his place, walked off, never to be seen again. And once again, this is July 18th of 2022, so we're coming up on 3 years, so another month, and this will be a 3-year-old disappearance. So that's what we're going to be doing this Friday. As for the audio, there was a few complaints about the audio for this past Friday. I expected the audio to be a little better too, but I could understand it. I am using, I have a new phone and a new tablet that I'm using to record, and they just record with a little bit different quality and things. And I think that I got it worked out, but it was certainly understandable. These people decided, I can't listen to it. That's crazy. You could certainly understand every word that was said last week. It was just a little different sounding than usual. This Friday, though, I can assure you, pretty good audio, even though I'm using the same equipment. Maybe I've worked that out. So that's this Friday. Matthew Tuttle, Fridley, Minnesota, July 18th, 2022. Two of his sisters and his mother are the guests. That's all I got for you tonight. So I got to everything in the headline. I answered Lisa's question. And so I'm feeling pretty good about myself tonight. I just can't help it. So everybody have a great week. Keep your heads on swivels out there. Do not make yourself easy victims. Be aware of your surroundings. Charlie, say hi to the kids for me. And good night.